have any questions for me judging while speed?
You're down to vote on whatever? Basically.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Then I'll put the thing.
I thought I was up.
Oh
no, I'm there.
No, you're not.
You're right.
Sorry. Right, you have Pacific as AF.
Yeah. I just double checked.
Okay.
I just misread it the first time. You're good.
Yeah. Alright. Let's get this.
Good?
Yeah, I'm good. Whatever you all are.
You ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I don't have the app in the
it's in,
thing,
I just put it in the bootstrap.
I don't see it up there either.
Okay. Is that the code?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me try uploading it again. Now do you guys see it?
No.
And it's this code.
Yeah.
Okay, so
LR.
I'm just okay. Let me try again. Let me
double check your Wi-Fi connection because I know it allowed me to go to something first and then it like.
Yeah, no, it's definitely on PQ.
3LR.
Okay, interesting. That's weird.
Okay, now I see it.
Now you see it? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. I don't know why it was being weird. Okay, then let's begin. One's inherency. One, cyber breaches in the healthcare sector are rising year on year. This isn't theoretical. Thousands of breaches have occurred in the last 8 years. HC News 2018. Over an 8 year span, the Health Organization reported 2,149 data breaches affecting 176 million records of the federal government, with every year bringing more incidents. The findings by the JAMA Network support the argument that healthcare is particularly vulnerable to hackers. Although network digital health records have the potential to improve clinical care, they also have the potential to harm to vast numbers of patients if the data security is not improved. The size of each breach can range from 500 to 78 million patient records. The ongoing transition to electronic health records may increase such breaches. 2, the former head of Homeland Security says passwords are the weakest link in cybersecurity today. Chertoff 16. Examination of breaches reveals a common theme in every major breach. The attack vector has been the common password. The password is by far the weakest link in cybersecurity today. Thus the plan. The United States federal government should order Cyber Command to mandate and enforce the adoption of strong passwords and multi-factor authentication requiring knowledge and inherence factors on all databases utilized as part of the emergency services sector and healthcare and public health sector. I reserve the right to clarify and cross-ex. Solvency. 3, we must leverage authentication technologies. Government regulation is needed with regards to implementation and critical infrastructure. Chertoff 16. We need to acknowledge the failure of passwords to make it a national priority to come up with something better, leveraging the next generation of authentication technologies. The government has an important role to play in setting adoption. Government can leverage its role in setting guidance for and regulating critical infrastructure by placing a greater emphasis on the use of strong authentication as well as ensuring that its use is ubiquitous. Advantage 1, cybersecurity, uniqueness. 4, a year-long study found that the healthcare sector has routinely failed to implement even the most basic of security, including the lack of passwords or the usage of singular passwords which are made publicly available. O'Hara, 2012. A year-long examination of cybersecurity has found healthcare most vulnerable because it lags behind in addressing their problems. I've never seen an industry with more gaping security holes, said Rubin, a director of Information Security Institute at Johns Hopkins University. Rubin has documented the routine failure to fix known flaws in a culture in which healthcare workers sidestep security measures such as passwords. The University of Chicago Medical Center operated an unsecured Dropbox for new residents managing patient care through their iPads using a single username and password published online. 5, the vast majority of medical professionals are terrible about passwords. Monica, 17. A recent study examined the prevalence of password sharing among healthcare providers and found nearly 3/4 of medical professionals have used another staff member's password to obtain EHR access. 100% of all medical residents reported obtaining another medical staff member's password with their consent. 77% of medical students and 83% of intern groups reported using someone else's EHR access credentials. Thus the links. 6, ransomware is growing. Using strong passwords can prevent brute forcing by remote criminals. Tripwire, 16. The growth of ransomware has driven the security industry to create tools for blocking these threats from being executed on computers. Measures that users should employ to ensure a higher level of defense against these plagues. Use strong passwords that cannot be brute forced by remote criminals. 7, multi-factor authentication is critical to resolving the harms of passwords. Vanderleest, 18. It's time for organizations to recognize the risk represented by passwords. Today, best practice comes in the form of multi-factor authentication technology to remove the static, easily stolen password from the equation altogether. 8, This is the first thing Homeland Security recommended the emergency services sector could do to resolve its vulnerabilities. Other sectors should do the same. Department of Homeland Security 17. ESS organizations use network computers for operational functions such as connectivity to bases, blowover practices that can be implemented including plans. Create strong passwords using a combination of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and special characters. Avoid words and basic patterns. Use a different password for each account. Use multi-factor authentication to access computer systems with knowledge factor, i.e. something you know, such as password, or inheritance factor, i.e. something you are, such as fingerprint identification. The impacts. 9. Medical identity theft results in medical history mix-ups, which can result in incorrect treatment or delayed care and billions in damages. In some instances, mix-ups have resulted in mothers nearly having their children taken away, and fixing these errors can take years. Andrew 16. Once they've got your identity, they've got your personal health insurance information is valuable and vulnerable. The thief's own medical history can get mixed up with your own electronic health records for years to come. Your care for years to come, and that isn't a hypothetical problem. About 20% of victims got a wrong diagnosis or treatment. Their care was delayed. Take Andrari Cromar's experience. A pregnant woman used Cromar's medical identity to pay for maternity care of nearby hospitals. Officials from Child Protective Services assumed the infant born with drugs in her system was Cromar's baby. The state, not realizing her medical identity had been hijacked, threatened to take her own 4 children away. It took years to get her medical records corrected. One estimate from 2012 put the total economic impact of medical identity theft in the U.S. at $41.3 billion. And 10, even a small breach can cost $500,000, a bad one as much as $4.9 billion. Chapeau, 2016. Even a small breach can be costly. The Catholic health breach resulted in a $650,000 regulatory fine. The healthcare field is the highest cost per breach record of any industry. The Health and Human Services website notes that there were 113 million records compromised in 2015, an 8-fold increase from the previous year. How much can it cost us? The soaring cost of lawsuits. First-time civil monetary penalties can be as high as $50,000 per breach, while repeat violations within a year cost $1.5 million. Tricare Health Management was sued for $4.9 billion. The underview. Prefer probable impacts. A. The role of the judge, vote for the proof or disproof of the resolution in this instance that most effectively prioritizes probable impacts. 1. Prefer probable impacts. In cybersecurity, worst case thinking means bad decision making. Schneer 2010. A monitor asked cybersecurity leaders what their nightmare scenario was. My answers were large-scale attacks against our infrastructure, against the power grid, against the financial system. Or their answer was large-scale attacks against our infrastructure, against the power grid, against the financial system. My answer was that people keep talking about the nightmare scenarios. Worst case thinking means bad decision making. It can be used to support any position or its opposite. If we build a nuclear power plant, it can melt down. If we don't build it, we will run short of power, and society will collapse into anarchy. The new undercurrent in this is that our society no longer has the ability to calculate probabilities. Risk assessment is devalued. Worst case thinking leads to bad decisions, bad system designs, and bad security. 2. In this instance, it's critical. If the mandate of the app is a good idea, it shouldn't matter whether it endorses the logic of X. We're using fiat to advance a hypothetical advocacy which has a probable chance to actually save some lives. 3. Gut check flashpoint impacts. Regardless of what their evidence says, mandating better passwords and authentication isn't going to cause a nuclear war. 4. Our model is also critical to debate in particular. 2. As a judge, you should evaluate low probability impacts at 0. Herbert and Coutoltz 92. We need to realize that some risks are so trivial that they are simply not meaningful. There is a point beneath which probabilities are meaningless. Debate judges routinely set minimal risks which would be similarly dismissed by leaders. Judges err in assessing any way to such speculative arguments. We do not believe it impossible to conclude, given current evidence and formats debate, that a plan might cause an increase in the risk of nuclear conflagration. At some point, a risk becomes so small that it should be ignored. Just as we ignore these risks in our own lives, we should be willing to ignore minimal risks. Advocates should focus on the initial probability and not on the marginal risk claimed by the negative.
Okay. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Start now. Okay, so basically you're saying only probable impacts matter?
Yeah, we're saying that's the impacts that we should be evaluating.
Okay, and your role of the judge to vote for proof or disproof of the resolution. You're basically saying, like, I have to prove the resolution false? Is that my burden?
That effectively prioritizes probable impacts.
Okay, so is my burden to prove that the app is a bad idea or to prove that the resolution is false?
So it's more so that, like, in the resolution, true or false, in the most, like, probable outcomes, right?
Okay,
that's, like,
so you're what this is saying is just like probable impacts are the only impacts, basically.
That's
right?
Those are the ones that we should be, like, weighing, yeah.
Okay, cool. Do you operate on a pre or post fiat level?
What do you mean?
Like, are your impacts pre-fiat or post-fiat?
Well, yeah, so they're still post-fiat.
Okay, cool. But they're probable post-fiat.
Yes.
Okay, so is this actually gonna, like, go into effect in the real world?
I mean, that's what we, like, that's what this point of debate is, right? Is, like, we're trying to see if this was enacted in the real world, what would it do?
Okay, but it's not actually enacted in the real world, right?
I mean, if you, sure, it doesn't.
Okay, so then your impacts don't actually happen, right?
No, but it's still in.
So then, if your impacts don't actually happen, isn't their probability 0?
No, because so in the debate space, we're still looking at a post-fiated plan, right? Like post-fiated policy implications.
Why?
Why? Because that's the burden of, and that's like what LD is.
Why is that?
Because that's what like an AF, that's what an AF does. That's like the burden of the AF to prove the stock issues and to prove that you have like solvency in a post-fiat world.
Okay. Let's talk about let's talk about your solvency. Okay, so you basically just say like government regulation is key. Is there any reason why cybercom specifically is key?
Because they're a cyber security agency.
Are there other cybersecurity agencies that could also solve this
Sure.
problem?
But
Okay.
Cyber Command is like apt to it.
Okay. Then so your impact scenario is basically just like billions of dollars of damage, right?
I would also say the protecting of 113 million patient records at least.
Okay. And that is a probable impact.
Yeah, medical identity theft is a probable impact.
Okay, how many people have had their identity stolen because of medical identity theft? Not how many could have their identity stolen, how many have in the past?
Okay, so there were 2.3 million cases identified in 2014,
Okay.
and that's within the Andrews 16 court.
Okay. Let's talk about the framing a bit more.
Mhm.
Just coming back to this like pre-fiat, post-fiat probability dichotomy.
Yeah.
So you believe that the role of the affirmative is to pretend that you're doing something in order to create some kind of fake impact?
I mean, that's kind of the point of debate.
Okay. Cool. I'm going to take running prep. Okay, stop prep. That was 125. Excuse me. Okay. The order is going to be one off in the case.
Put in that speech drop already.
Yeah. You like the picture? Everything good? Starting time now. First is framework. 1. The role of the ballot is to vote for the team that best breaks down the codified system of resistance and adopts an untraceable one. 2. Fiat is illusory and using state methods and epistemology creates striations. A. Role playing as the state allows the state to infest and trace mechanisms of liberation and resistance groups. B. State epistemes math the lines of power along, allowing for resistance to become overcodified and operate inside the state parameters, which allows for mechanized failsafes to exist in the resistance structures, allowing for serial policy failure to occur. 3. Prefer pre-fiat impacts because they're the only ones that are real. 1. The apps codification and ordering of cyberspace represent a reliance on endorsement of state science which strides space and virtuality in the world, suppressing the smooth spaces around the nomad. This appropriates the war machine from the nomad and constrains movement and creation of smooth space. DNG 87. The model operates in open space through hours flows are distributed rather than plotting out an open space for linear and solid instance difference between smooth spaces and strided space. Smooth spaces occur through accounting and strided spaces occurs in order to be occupied. The war machine is protecting an abstract knowledge form immediately different from the state apparatus. State science continually imposes sovereignty The Nomad science, state science terms and use strictly limited formulas and bans it. 7. Of the War Machine copy the War Machine nurtures them and state imposes them on them in order to states not appropriate the War Machine without submitting to it several metric rules that strictly limit control to localize. Nomad science state needs to subordinate hydraulic force to conduits which prevent turbulence, which constrain movement in space itself to be stried through measure. The hydraulic model of Nomad science War Machine consists of being distributed by turbulence along smooth space and producing movement that holds space instead of being held by space local movement specified one point to another. 2. Striations cause domination by politics and the appropriation of the War Machine, making smooth spaces impossible. DNG 87. The state strides space over which it reigns is a vital concern if a state not only vanquish nomadism but to control migrations, fix patterns of well-defined directions, restrict speeds, regulate circulation, measure the relative movements of subjects and objects, responsive states against all threat, assist, striate space. The state does not appropriate the War Machine without giving it the form of relative movement. 3. Biopolitics causes oppression, war, and genocide. Foucault 80. Power of sovereign over subjects can be exercised, wielding indirect power over them. Life and death. Sovereign exercises the right only by life of exercising the right to kill. The major form of power working to reinforce, control, monitor, optimize, and organize forces under populations mobilized for the purpose of wholesale slaughters. It manages life and survival. The bodies of the race. So many regimes have been able to wage so many wars of genocide. The dream of modern powers because power is situated exercise the level of life in the population. 4. State appropriation of the War Machine from the Nomad is the root cause of militarism and war. Turns the F. DNG 87. Experience of the power of the War Machine tends in certain circumstances to be confused with one of two heads of state apparatus. Sometimes it's confused with magic violence of state. At other times, the state's military institution. There is great danger of the structural relation between political sovereignty with the power of the war. The state has no war machine of its own. It can only appropriate one in the form of a military institution. 5. The alt is to vote neg to reject the striations of the 1AC to begin the creation of smooth spaces in its place. Only through this space can we obscure lines of light for the nomad and other individuals that allow unfollowable resistance and micro-ruptures against the biopolitical state that cannot be co-opted. This rejection and shift to smooth spaces makes visible the striated barriers of the state that justify state violence. DNG 87. Smooth space has no homogeneity, and the linking of proximities is affected independently of any determined path of space of contact. Small tactile manual actions of the contact rather than the striated space. Smooth space is field without conduits or channels. Field heterogeneous smooth space is to a very particular type of multiplicity. They do not mean a visual condition being observable from a point in space external to them. Dumbsville has established the importance of the opposition precisely in the relation to the state apparatus limiting movement striate space, but rapidity applies only to movement. The deviates occupying smooth space in this space. Matter flow can no longer be hidden in parallel layers, and movement can no longer itself be hammered into relations between points. Smooth space reconquers properties of contract that prevent it from remaining homogeneous striated. Nomad science and subordinate all their operations following the flow of matter, drawing up and linking smooth space. The alt is a prior question to solving the 1AC. The creation of artificial striations is what creates the impossibilities of change and policy advancement in the world of the 1AC. But by breaking down these mechanisms, we allow for a revelation against dominant ideology about what has caused violence, and instead allow for the resistance to actors that are capable of hiding their roles in complacent violence. This violence comes first because it's invisible without the alt, and without unqualified rejection and resistance to the striations of the state. Invisible violence is always obscured and never resisted, so we must prioritize it. And it is a very probable impact, and as they say, we should be prioritizing probable impacts. This is also a pre-fiat impact, which is way more probable than post-fiat impacts, because as they concede in cross-ex, which should be binding, post-fiat impacts never actually go into effect in the real world, meaning that they have 0% probability because they don't actually happen or do anything. That means that under their own framework, these are the most probable impacts because they are literally happening right now and we need to solve for them. Go to case. Solvency. First argument, the K is a terminal solvency takeout to the affirmative for several reasons. A. Card 4 of the K indicates that the state appropriation of the war machine via striations and other methods is the root cause of militarism and war, meaning that any attempt to solve for such harms by the F is merely an attempt to control a symptom and not the cause. B. Cross-apply serial policy failure from the framework. Without first resolving for state striations, any attempt to make policy inevitably fail. C. It's likely that there are manifestations of invisible violence affecting the world that the AF seeks to fix that they cannot account for that underpin the root of the problem. The AF continues to obscure this violence with striations, meaning they can never comprehensively solve for anything. More solvency. There's a lack of centralized control over cyber policy now that the plan cannot correct, which means there's no solvency. Schlein 18. Without proper organizational structure, the U.S. will never achieve operational excellence in cyber endeavors. Today, we were organized to avail capabilities distributed across so many different parts of the government. They were overwhelmed with bureaucracy and efficiency. The Department of Homeland Security is responsible for national protection. The FBI is led responsibility for investigation and enforcement. DOD, including Cyber Command, is in charge of national defense. No matter what anyone wanted to win, no one wanted to win organized critical capabilities such as distributed in dispersed manner. Our current approach cannot work. Next, the HHS has ended its ties with Cybercom in favor of the DHS, largely because Cybercom was not present when needed. This postdates their solvency. Davis 18. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services officially opened its health sector cybersecurity coordination center, HC3, putting an end to the much troubled healthcare cybersecurity communications integration center. Yes, they are different beyond just a new name. HC3 will work with more stakeholders, including the Department of Homeland Security, to provide cybersecurity information sharing technology with the healthcare sector. HCCIC was launched in April 2017. The threats changed, the problems changing, organizations are now being tackled on a level that they aren't capable of handling on their own. HCCIC quickly began to unravel. In July, it was announced that HHS would move the HCCIC to the Communication Security Reliability and Interoperability Council of Atlanta by September. Again, one HCCIC Director Maggie Amano will abruptly sideline a report. An investigation was due in September 2018, but it's yet to be released by March. Scanlon reported that HCCIC was decimated, claiming HHS had abandoned the committee made with HCCIC. This was a big loss for NHIS, AC, which has no partnership. The assertions then continued to June 2018 with the House and Senate committees railing against HHS, saying HCCIC was so unstable staff didn't know it existed. This means that the AF never has any solvency because Cybercom and all of our cyber capabilities are too widely dispersed across different bodies. The Department of Health and Human Services has failed to work with Cybercom in the past, indicating that you have no solvency. These also are very probable because we know that these things are problems that are occurring right now, which means that any chance of solvency for the affirmative is terminally low, and terminal solvency defense is under a stock issues paradigm enough to vote neg. For these reasons, I negate and am open to cross. And I didn't read that final card in the doc, just so you know.
Good?
Yep.
Okay. The first question I have for you is, so what exactly does the alt actually do?
Yeah, so the alt is like, it's kind of a nuanced rejection of the affirmative.
Okay.
So it's rejecting the notion of striations and the actions that you're doing to striate cyberspace. Okay, so and we have to do that in order to begin the creation of smooth space in its place.
Okay, what's the status of the alt?
Unconditional.
Okay, so I guess you're saying the point of the K is that because the state keeps striating space, we're not solving for problems.
Yeah, that's one aspect of it. Like in the framework, I talk about how there's like serial policy failure as a result of state epistemes mapping lines of power. So the state is like over codifying things, and it means that we can never solve for actual violence because they have complete control over everything. Okay. Basically, if that answers your question.
Okay, so you're talking about this being pre-fiat.
Yeah.
But then you also say I'm linking because I'm using the state.
Yeah.
Okay, so like in this
I mean, that's one of the links. I mean, it's also like what your plan does. You're codifying and ordering cyberspace by adopting a strict set of passwords that are allowed to be used, and those passwords then codify cyberspace further by allowing only a certain type of movement of cyber data throughout.
Okay, so then what would your alt look like then in round?
What do you mean?
So I'm just, because you keep talking about pre-fiat and how pre-fiat are the only probable impacts of the round, but then I'm just wondering what's the impact in this round?
The impact, so I have two impact cards. It's the third card, which is talking about how biopolitics causes oppression, war, and genocide. And then the fourth card, which says that this is the root cause of militarism and war. So it's basically like the methods and epistemology that you're promoting cause these things, and we can't afford to do that. We have to reject that to create smooth space instead.
Okay. Oh, and then the other thing I have is on this second card, the Davis 18, where in it does it say anything about Cyber Command?
It doesn't.
Oh, okay.
It's just talking about state science in general, and the state using scientific and technological methods to enact their will.
Your tag is just superpower tag.
It doesn't say anything about cybersecurity. I don't know what.
Well, your tag itself says the HIS.
Oh, down. Sorry, I thought you meant in the K. Okay,
no, I'm
sorry.
talking about your solvency.
Okay, yeah. So it's basically talking about the HHS ending its ties with.
Where does it say Cyber Command in there?
It doesn't. It's talking about HCCIC, which is a cybercom entity.
Okay. I'm gonna take some running prep. Stopped and I'm uploading it. So it's going to be K, or yeah, like different, whatever. It's in the doc. It's going to be the order of the doc. So it's going to be like the K as a whole, and then it's going to be the case.
Okay.
And I used 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Okay. Is everyone ready? Okay. Once we actually I don't have mine. Sorry. Okay. First going to be the interpretation. The affirmative gets to weigh the fiated implications of the plan against the K. The reasons to prefer: 1 is the predictability. They make the AF be prepared for an infinite number of philosophical arguments. The only predictable answer is able to weigh the AF. 2 is NFA rules. If they can't articulate their critique of the stock issues, then it's outside the bounds of debate. 3 is fairness. The interp allows us to retain the 6 minutes of the 1AC and prevents us from having to restart our speech in the 1AR. 4 is moral testing. By evaluating the impacts of the K versus the case is the best way to evaluate the benefits and consequences of their moral ethics. Role-playing as a state means we learn about the state without being it. The critique focuses on overarching ethics questions, perpetuating apathy, which prevents real change. The Naughty 14. Options for resistance in governmental scripts are not limited to rejection. It is found instead in contingent struggles that are within the governmental rationality that at the same time exceed and transform them. The approach questions oversimplifications of complexities and nurtures a radical skepticism about identifying solutions to political problems. Governments are as heuristic invites careful differentiations rather than overarching demonizations of power. Also fosters an ethics of political engagement. Second is that focusing on epistemology or ontology selfishly ignores the real world problems. Jarvis 2000. These days, one can neither nor conclude empirical research without first discussing epistemological orientations and ontological assumptions. International relations has become increasingly inward-looking. Rather than grapple with numerous issues that confront people around the world, the politics of famine, environmental degradation, underdevelopment, or ethnic cleansing seems scarcely to concern theorists of international politics who define the urgent task of our time to be one of metaphysical reflection and epistemological investigation. Theory is no longer concerned with the study of international relations as much as the manner in which international relations as a discipline have been constructed. Next is that Cyber Command. So basically on this K, you're still going to be like evaluating it through like post-fiat implications because they say fiat's illusory. However, we're actually getting a better form of knowledge and a better form of like debate in this debate. That's like the biggest thing when we're actually looking at like the policy options that policy making can actually be good. And so you're still going to be like preferring like the role of the ballot that in my underview about like preferring probable impacts. But so onto then the K proper. There's like not a card for this in the doc, but just went onto there. Okay. So the first thing that they talk about is like the codification of cyberspace. Actually, just dropped into their alt. They say it's like the prior question that like they need to like create these striated spaces and not like, or they need to create like smooth space and like break away just to reject the 1AC. But the alt in and of itself is creating this idea of a striated space. They're going to be linking and biting harder into their own K here because of the fact that they're not actually creating smooth space. Their interrogation in the same way that the state would interrogate is like just as bad. They're saying that we're creating this idea and like this codification of cyberspace. However, they're codifying the debate space by running this alt. It's just a rejection of the 1AC and in particular, rather than clashing with it, they're like they're just linking into their own K. But then going on to like the case. The first thing here is actually on the alt do one second, sorry. The alt is to like do the plan and then all like non-competitive parts of the alt. The thing here is that without like I don't think this is in the doc. Sorry. It's not. Okay, so actually just go on to case. So the only solvency they put here is like solvency press on case is they say the K is like terminal solvency because like we're like appropriating the war machine via striations and other methods. We're gonna be extending the underview, the second part of the underview here, where we tell you it doesn't matter like the ideology or like whatever like criticism we're endorsing, because we still get like the post-fiated implications of the plan. They didn't respond to this underview, so that's why it's gonna be inherently they're getting their own K framed out by not responding to this underview. The second thing is that they say apply like serial policy framework like to this. However, you're gonna still be referencing the cards that I just read you about like how it's actually important for us to like talk like look at real world problems and like seeing that policy making can actually be good. So you're gonna be applying the Zanotti 14 as well as the Jarvis 2000 card to their like B sub point that's not even warranted, as well as the they say there's just like manifestations of violence that we're not accounting for. Again, you're gonna be cross-applying our underview here. We're talking about probable impacts, and that in cybersecurity specifically, that's the Schneer 2010 card that I read you, that in cybersecurity specifically, when we talk about worst case impacts or all of the violence that's possible, it's actually worse for decision making, for systems designs, and that's ultimately gonna be the impact you're gonna be looking to. They don't respond to the underview, and that's gonna be detrimental in this case. The second thing, now onto the solvency proper that they try to read you. In the doc that I just uploaded, it says, so Cyber Command was established to protect the advancing threat of cyber attacks on U.S. and its allies. Lisa Fernando, 18. U.S. Cyber Command cyber domain will define the next century of warfare, playing a critical role in tasks that include training cyber warriors, advocating for more cybersecurity resources, and planning and conducting cyber operations. U.S. Cyber Command was established in 2009 in response to the rapidly evolving threats, with adversaries seeking to exploit its cyber domain to attack the United States and its allies. Like this argument that like cybercom is just going to be like this militarized force, that we're just militarizing like all parts of the industry, isn't true. This card tells you sure they may be a military agency, but that does not change the fact that they have the purpose of still protecting and defending cyber domains, like the ones I tell you about in hospitals. The second thing here is the March 2012 card. Cyber Command can operate in non-military networks. President Obama had signed a secretive directive expanding the U.S. military's authority in cyberspace to include defensive non-military networks. So like when you're like looking at their Davis 18 card, when they're telling you that the HHS has ended its ties with Cyber Command, the thing to point to here is the fact that nowhere within their card does it actually say that they like anywhere Cyber Command, so you're not going to be solving there. We're also just going to be extending all of the 1AC, all of the underview through that went untouched, and that shows that we still have solvency and stock burden. We're meeting our stock burden like issues.
Okay. I have 2 minutes 35 with prep, so I'm gonna start that now. Real quick, did you like actually make the perm argument, or was that a never mind type of thing?
I mean, I still said like
Okay.
data perm.
Yeah, no new cards. Oh, actually, there is one card. Sorry, I lied. I will put that in right now. Let me know when you have it. Okay. So the order, it's gonna be a quick framing overview.
You want to just float on
It can just be flowed on the framework, yeah. And then I'll be going over the framework debate some more, and then the K proper, and then the AF solvency page, basically. And when I'm going over a framework, I'm kind of going to be hitting both the K framework and the AF's like framework underview.
Okay.
So, just so you know. Everyone ready? Starting time. Now the overview is that the K operates within a stock issues paradigm, even if you believe that that is the best paradigm to have, because I talk about terminal solvency takeouts to the affirmative as a result of the K, which by the way works independently of alt solvency. So even if you buy that the alt doesn't solve anything, the substance of the K is still a terminal solvency deficit to the affirmative, which went unanswered, and we have to resolve serial policy failure before the AF can ever solve for anything. Next, go to the AF's framework. They say that I didn't answer any of their framework underview, but the K responds directly with my framework that is pretty directly responsive to them. When I read my own roll of the ballot and things that are responding to the affirmative's framework, I was basically saying like, yeah, okay, I agree, low probability impacts are bad. Let's go with the high probability impacts. I'm even trying to access a lot of that. But I do talk about policymaking in response to them saying policymaking is good. 1, cross-play serial policy failure is a turn in any offense you get from policymaking good. We can't make policy until we resolve serial policy failure, meaning that the K is the critical internal link to policymaking. 2, policymaking isn't good if we don't first investigate the underlying methods of epistemology that shapes those policies. Racist methods will create racist policy, intentionally or not, explicitly or not. So if the AF wants to defend racist or otherwise screwed up policy, the K is a prior question. So unless the AF wants to do that, the K is a prior question to making ethical policy. 3, your role-playing is flawed. A, you role-play as an unethical actor using unethical methods. Let's fix that so role-playing can be better. B, role-playing is the government without acknowledging its flaws masks the violence it creates, furthering the invisibility, making it impossible to solve for. Extend that invisible violence comes first, which went dropped in the 1AR. C, yes, policymaking is a portable skill, but we don't want debaters to take bad policymaking skills into the real world, i.e. Ted Cruz. This turns their argument. Also, critical thinking is a more important portable skill that only the neg accesses because it affects everyone, not just debaters who become policymakers. And let's see. Yeah, basically they say that, oh, role-playing isn't being the state, we're learning about it, but you are using state epistemology, which leads to co-option by the state of whatever thing we're trying to do. So that means that as long as you're role-playing as the state without first investigating what the state is trying to make the state better by exercising your power outside of the state and creating fluid lines of resistance a la smooth space, which is what the alt does, you can never actually have anything happen because the state will co-opt any movement in order that is trying to bring its power down. This is also a disadvantage to the perm because any combination of state action with doing the alternative means that the perm fails because the state will co-opt the movement, basically. This is literally the subpoint A of my framework, which went unresponded to. All they say is that role-playing as the state isn't the state, but this is non-responsive to the arguments that I was making in the 1NC. Okay, go to the K proper. Actually, slightly more on framework. Extend my role of the ballot, which is a vote for the team that best breaks down codified systems of resistance and adopts an untraceable one. I am controlling the root cause here because they failed to respond to card 4 of the K proper, which says that state striations are the root cause of war and militarism, which is what they seek to solve for by trying to implement cybersecurity measures. This is also a turn to the AF, which they dropped. But even so, that means that I'm controlling the root cause, and there's no way to solve the root cause without first doing the alternative. That means that the role of the ballot is that my role of the ballot is the only way to actually solve the harms that the AF talks about, and that is the one you should be preferring. They have given no instance in which they access my role of the ballot whatsoever. Perms are tests of competition, not advocacies, which means that they cannot try to access this in the 2AR, and any new 2AR responses to this should not be evaluated. Next. They say focus on epistemology and ontology and ignores real-world problems. I want to cross-apply all my policy-making arguments that I already made, and next turn fiat ignores and masks real-world problems by making us feel good and making us feel like we're solving things and actually doing good in the real world when we're really just kids talking in a room and not actually going to do anything in the real world unless we actually start a movement within the debate space and focus on our methods and how to make ourselves better actors in the real world. Also, I focus on methods in addition to epistemology and ontology, so I'm not just talking about those things. Even if you believe epistemology and ontology are bad, I still access methods offense. And next, these things shape real world problems. I've already talked about that. Cross-apply the racist policy, racist methodology argument I made earlier. Okay, now go to the K proper. Literally extend everything. The only response they make is on the alternative. They they say that the alt bites the K by codifying the debate space to create striations. They don't actually have a warrant or articulate what this argument is or why the alternative actually bites into the K. They don't have any evidence or anything that says it does. Also, even if we did create striations, nomad striations are not the same thing as state striations. I am not the state. I am not endorsing state epistemology, meaning that any striations I create do not matter and do not have any effect, because it's key that state striations are what give the state the ability to be biopolitical in the first place. They do not respond to any of the links, which are cards 1 and 2. So they link to, and they create striations. They've conceded this. They've conceded that that causes biopolitics, genocide, oppression, and domination, and that it's the root cause of war and militarism, which turns the affirmative. This means even independent of any alt solvency, that the root cause of the affirmative cannot be solved unless we do the alternative first, turning the aff. They've conceded this turn. This is enough for you to vote neg right here, right now. But then go on to the perm. Extend the second card of K. It clearly states that it is vital for states to striate space. It is one of their fundamental functions. This means that any state action by the affirmative is an act of striation, and therefore both mutually exclusive with the alt of smooth spaces, which literally cannot exist with striated spaces because they are polar opposites. Next, striated spaces are necessarily and unconditionally restrict smooth space, making the plan and the alt incompatible because the aff prevents the alt, DNG 87. The variability of directions and essential feature of smooth spaces, nomad space, localized and delimited, was limiting striated space, limiting parts which are assigned constant directions oriented in relation to one another, visible boundaries, and can interlink what is limiting in the aggregate relation to smooth spaces, which it contains growth, prevents, and which it restricts. I'm not going to read the rest of that, but basically just like extend that the perm doesn't work. I already made arguments about this earlier. They also gave no net benefit to the perm in the 1AR, so there's no reason you'd ever want to do that. Lastly, extend the solvency cards that I read against the affirmative in the 1NC. Cybercom can't work with the HHS. They say my card doesn't say Cybercom in it. I answered this in cross-X. HCCIS is a Cybercom entity.
There's no new cards. The order is going to be basically it's just going to be voters.
Okay.
If you want, you can start. It's going to be the underview of the AF. So it's going to be like the framework comparisons, and then the like the alt case solvency debate.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. Are we ready? Okay. And nobody on top. Okay. you'll be voting for Pacific TS in today's debate at the point in which the only solvency that we're really garnishing in this debate round is through the affirmative, by being able to solve for the probable post-fiat impacts of passing plan and making sure that 113 million patient records don't get like hijacked every year. So go to the underview. The first thing that you're going to be extending is a Schneer 2010 card, which fundamentally goes conceded throughout the round. The reason that this is key is because it means in any instance of cybersecurity, worst case thinking means bad decision making, bad system designs, and bad security. The reason that this is key is even if you want to buy their K about like the methodology they're using or like the mindset they're endorsing, it doesn't matter when you're still thinking worst case in cybersecurity. This point went uncontested throughout the round, which means it's still accessible and still flows aft. Why is this so key? Well, first, look down to the second point. In this instance, it's critical. If the mandate of the app is a good idea, it shouldn't matter whether it endorses the logic of X. We're using fiat to advance a hypothetical advocacy, which has a probable chance to actually save some lives. The only argument they have here is that outside this round, we're not actually passing the policy. But I've given you the cards in the last speech, the two on the framework about how it's important for us to actually imagine how we would pass this policy because that is inherently better for policy making. This goes uncontested. These two cards I read, they try to tell you that policy making is bad, and they have like all of these unwarranted like responses to that they just like give you in like these bulleted points, and they say that the K like they're serious policy failure like arguments go against this. But we're telling you in these two cards that I read that it doesn't matter if you're going to be extending the Zanotti 14 card as well as the Jarvis 2000 card, where it talks about just focusing on epistemology and ontology really does ignore real world problems. And though they claim that they're solving with the root causes like racism and violence better, we're telling you that unless we're able to actually play and like as policymakers, we're never going to be doing that. Because these two cards went untouched, you're going to be flowing those through and seeing that role-playing as the state means we learn about the state without being it. Now, this is inherently crucial because my opponent's saying I'm linking to the K because I'm endorsing like state logic. Right? But I'm not actually the state. Neither one of us are actually the state. So even if you want to buy the K, like you're not going to be seeing that either one of us really are the state. We're still just two people from two different schools in this room. And that argument still went like uncontested. So then when you go to the like perm alt like case solvency debate, they say I can't go to for the perm. Okay, then just look at it in two worlds. One, you have the K where it's just this striation of space or this stopping of striation of space, and yet they haven't really told you what that looks like. And I've told you that I think they're actually biting into it harder by running the K in the first place because they're still endorsing that same logic, and this doesn't go like contested either in this round. It still goes conceded. So you're still going to be seeing that the solvency that you have within this round is via the underview and via the affirmative case at the point in which Cyber Command is able to actually put passwords in hospitals and see that you can solve for hospitals post-fiat. Post-fiat. Good debate.
Give me just a minute.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, so I'm going to end up voting negative in this debate. So this is how I wrote it about it. I think the neg wins the framework debate by controlling the internal policy-making impacts Even if I don't grab the neg, even if I say grant, the app access to your framework, or I grant it to be a wash, I don't feel like the app effectively responds to the interactions of the K with the app, which means I'm justified as voting on the K as a terminal solvency deficit of the app. That's not how I vote, but that's just, even absent this framework debate, I can still vote for the K because you just mishandle that. What it ends up coming down to is I think you really kind of mishandle the alt solvency and perm debate, which means especially when you're essentially granting cold conceding the links to the K and don't really do any responses to the internal link impact level of the K. I think that I end up granting, I end up kind of weighing the K against the app, but I also end up granting the risk of alt solvency to kind of be so I end up giving him the argument about the K sort of being the internal link to app solvency, and so then when there's still a risk of alt solvency at the end of the day because you mishandled the perm and the alt solvency arguments, I vote there. So a couple things, like, okay, I said this on the comments too. I get why you're trying to do D&G on this topic.
Yeah.
Like, I understand at a conceptual level, but I think that I just think the K has some problems.
Okay.
One of the biggest ones is that I think you need some specific articulation about cybersecurity, because I think like the smart answer that, and if you hit this sort of K, like, okay, if the state creates these shredded spaces, why does it uniquely create this via cybersecurity, right? Because I think the argument is this: if the state just inherently creates these spaces, well, the state still exists post-alt. So how does the alt solve? And then two, why is cybersecurity uniquely bad? And like, why does my 1AC uniquely create a striated space, right? I think that's those arguments that you really need to make on the K. And I think y'all both spend a lot of time on this framework debate, and I think especially like you make a lot of smart answers about how you're still, even if like you don't win the framework, you're still how the K still interacts in the stock issues paradigm, which I think is a smart answer. But you especially need to make sure you're really effectively responding to that. Like, it's more than just policy making good. It's like he's basically like, I don't even care if we win the policy making's good. Here's how the K still functions. You need to be able to respond to that, because right now, even if you win your framework, the K is still in play, right? Especially when you don't respond to the link level, and don't do enough on the alt to really do anything to alt solvency. So I would have liked to see you spend less time on the framework, because I think all this time that you're spending on the framework gets you behind in the 1AR, and then he just gets to come up here and kind of frame the debate, has a lot of time to make line bow and articulation that just puts you in a hole you can't get out of the 2AR.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool, thank you.